Hey everyone, this is a video on development largely for our project. So we'll go through the types of development first. There's three broad types. The first is economic development, and that's where we get the growth, so the increases in real output and incomes per capita, but we also get those increased standards of living. And by standards of living here, I mean improving the lives of people. So not just increased standard of living, meaning having more money. So in addition to that growth, you're getting the access to food, shelter, healthcare, sanitation. These things that just improve the lives of people, increased employment opportunities, and a reduction in income and wealth inequality. We'll look at a little bit more at inequality a bit later. We've also got human development. So this is about freedom. It's about people being able to live a proper life, right? So firstly, base level, being able to satisfy hunger, right? We have to be able to live, right? Clothing and shelter are next. Then it's starting to be able to fully participate in life. This is really what we mean here. So to do that, you really need to be able to read, write, be educated, find work, right? This goes a step further, getting that legal protection and being free to engage in the political process. That means actually getting a vote, right? Being protected by the law so that your freedoms aren't infringed in that way. And this is the most free of all, I guess, is to be able to fulfill one's potential. So to live to your full potential as a human. So anything that works towards those is human development. And sustainable development. This is improvements in development that don't compromise the ability of future generations to also be able to enjoy the quality of life. So we're not sacrificing the future to help people now, right? It's sustainable. Ideally, the people in the future live an even better life than the people now. Okay, economic growth and economic development often are terms that get conflated with each other. So I just want to see the difference and show how they are related, but they're not extremely related. Okay, hopefully it'll become clear. So what is economic growth? Now, I know you're thinking economic growth and you're just straight away thinking increase in real GDP. That's true. So economic growth can occur and the lives of people aren't necessarily improved. So for example, deforestation, that could have harmful effects, right? Spending on military, that's going to increase GDP. Spending on jails, that's going to increase real GDP. But we're not necessarily improving people's lives when we do that. So it could be a problem. But on the other hand, economic growth can help economic development. It can aid in improving the lives of people. So, for instance, the tax money that can come from growth, even the private money that can come from growth can help fund things like schools and healthcare or sanitation, clean drinking water, a basic, right? Okay. So growth can help, but it can also not particularly help. And also there's one other factor here. We can get economic development without economic growth. That is also possible. And it's really about allocating resources, right? So a big one for a lot of these poor countries is realizing the potential of women and girls. In a lot of these poor countries, they are left behind, and that's women and girls, they are 50% of the population, right? They are a huge economic benefit to a country. So to tap into that can definitely lead to improving the lives of people, not just the girls, but sort of everyone. And that doesn't necessarily cost any money to do. That's the important thing here. Development can occur without growth. Also, political freedom. that can occur without necessarily spending money. So the right to protest, this is what these people are fighting for, and the right to vote, we take it for granted in Australia. It does not happen all around the world, but it doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money to have a fair system of democracy. And it can also just be resource allocation. So some countries, they don't spend their resources well. They might make, vanity projects for the leaders, and whereas often you can improve people's lives in a substantial way by just allocating the resources more effectively. So this picture here, we've got an open sewer. Now that's not great for sanitation. That's it's going to lead to a lot of disease. So potentially in these countries, they're spending money, but in the wrong parts. So they could make huge improvements to the health of their people, perhaps if they invested in a proper sanitation system. So they don't have to have more money to do this, is the point that we are trying to make here. Okay, let's look at some indicators of development. Now, a big one, GNI per capita. It's what it shows about a country. It shows the incomes generated by the residents of the country. So that's useful. That tells you a bit about how much the lives of the people in the country, how good they are. It usually tells us a bit about education, because we need education to get those higher incomes, and often those higher incomes can lead to more education, right? So that higher incomes lead to more tax, lead to more government funds available to invest in education, for example. Often greater health, people with higher incomes, more money to spend on their own health, more tax dollars to spend on health. It can show a bit about governance, that the government are putting in place the right structures in order for people to earn higher incomes. So it's a good indicator in that way as well. Another one that is used widely is life expectancy at birth, right? That's a big indicator of health. The healthier a population is, the greater the length of life you would expect them to have when they're born, right? Which also, the higher the life expectancy, that tells us a bit about their incomes, because they've got the money to look after their own health as well. And the tax money for the government to invest in health. It tells us a bit about education, because there are big gains to be made in health in some really poor countries just by education about how to look after yourself, how to avoid things like unwanted pregnancies, how to avoid diseases by being just that little bit more sanitary. Things that we take for granted, but we can't take for granted in some countries. It tells us a little bit about governance, about how well governments are allocating resources. For example, another big indicator of development is our mean years of schooling. That doesn't mean harsh years of schooling, it means average years of schooling. So it tells us how much education someone has. It doesn't tell us the quality of the education, but it tells us how much they have. It says a little bit about the skills of the people in the country, what sort of opportunities they're going to have. So quality of life in that way. Telling us a fair bit about incomes. The higher amount of education you have, the more opportunity you have to make income. And again, it tells us about governance, that the government are putting the right structures in place. A few different kind of ones here. So access to electricity, again, something we take for granted, but shouldn't be for some of these countries. Incomes, this is what it tells us about a country. It tells us about their incomes. If everyone's got access to electricity, there's decent incomes in the country because the government has the money to spend on this, right? It tells us about their potential for more economic growth in the future, because electricity is pretty much an input in every single good and service that we can produce. It tells us a bit about their education. Think of how much more effectively you are able to learn just having electricity in your school and at home, even to the point of having light to read with at night, right? Makes a huge difference. Health, obviously you can provide much more healthcare, much better healthcare with electricity than without, and it tells us about the governance, investments in infrastructure and that sort of thing. Another indicator you could look at, how many kilometers of rail lines are in the country. This tells us quite a bit. It tells us about the incomes, how does the government get this money to spend. It tells us again about growth potential, getting goods to their ports, from the producers to the consumers. Really important. Big way we do this is with rail. So it shows that potential for more growth. It lowers costs of production as well. It tells us a bit about the ease of doing business. So is it easy to make money in this country? The more rail lines you have, probably the easier it is to do business, because you can get your intermediate goods and your inputs in, and you can get your product out. Another one, adolescent fertility rate. So not how fertile young girls are, but how many babies they have is what this is measuring. And how many teen pregnancies there are tells us quite a bit. It tells us a bit about education, so knowledge about contraception. Generally, the higher level of education, the more knowledge of contraception. It tells us about the opportunities that these young girls have. Often pregnancy comes up, there will be younger pregnancies when economic opportunity just isn't there, because it's almost, what else are we going to do? They're not putting it off for study, which is a study and career, which is what happens in many developed countries. Tells us a lot about incomes. Again, are we able to put off families in order to earn incomes in the future? It tells us how much money is available for proper healthcare in terms of contraception. It tells us a lot about gender roles in an economy as well, in a country. Are girls expected to be able to have a career, or are they expected to just be mothers? Okay, now we are looking at what we call a composite index, and this is the most famous one by far, the Human Development Index. It was invented by this guy, Mahbub al-Haq. He's a Pakistani economist. So this looks at health, income, and education altogether. So it looks at these aspects, and these are single indicators that we've already looked at. So it just weights them equally. Life expectancy, education, uses 2 measures of education, mean years of schooling, and expected years. And through a mathematical calculation, it comes up with a value between 0 and 1. And the higher the value represents higher development. So we've got 2 countries here. We've got Norway and Niger. You probably know already which has the higher development. But here we are. HDI of Norway is 0.944. It's often one of the top couple of countries in terms of development, and Niger is 0.348. Okay, and we will move on. Okay, we're going to look at measuring inequality here. So here we've got the data for a fictional country, Burmistan, and this is what economists do when they measure income inequality. They take the poorest 20% of the population and see how much of the total income they have. So poorest 20% in Burmistan earn 5% of total income. The second poorest 20% earn 10%. Third poorest earn 15%. The second richest, earn 25% of total income, and the richest 20% earn 45% of the total income. So let's look at how we plot this on a diagram. So here is Lorenz curve. It's named after the guy who invented it, called Lorenz. And we've got this line of perfect equality here. So for instance here, 20% of the population will earn 20% of the income. The poorest 40% will earn 40% of the income. So everyone is absolutely equal. So by definition, we've got Lorenz curve is going to start here. 0% of the population earn 0% of the income. 100% of the population earn 100% of the income. And we just plot quintiles here. That's Lorenz. He's the economist who invented this. So here's our data against the same data. And essentially just plot it out. So here we've got the poorest 5%, they earn, or poorest 20%, they earn 5% of the income. Poorest 40%, they earn 15% of the income. Poorest 60, they earn 30%. So 5, 10, 15 equals 30%. They earn 30% of the income. And then the poorest 80% earn 55% of the income, and the richest 100% earn 100% of the income. So we plot out our graph like this. So we've got the line of perfect equality, and we've got the Lorenz curve. So this is the actual distribution of income in a country. Okay, and all my numbers are gone there. I don't know what's happening here on the axis, but don't worry about that, doesn't matter. And the idea here is that the bigger, this sort of shape, it looks like a banana if you squint, I guess. So it looks like a banana. The bigger the banana, the more unequal the income is. So the more it bows out, the more unequal the income is. So this is perfectly equal, this diagonal line, and this is the actual distribution. Now we don't want it to be perfectly equal. That isn't really a good outcome for society. I can discuss that in class if you want clarification on that. We use the term perfect here as in absolutely equal. Okay, that's what we need to know about income inequality, and it's really most of what we need to know about development. Thank you.